Hey everyone, so we are on chapter 19 in your textbook, and we are on chapter 11 on my website. We'll be talking about blood vessels and blood pressure. So let's start. Blood vessels! They have three layers your tunica adventitia, which is the outermost layer, and it has it's comprised of a connective tissue. And then there's your tunica media, which is the middle layer, and it has smooth muscle and elastin or elastic fibers. And then there is the tunica intima, which is basically endothelium, and we know already that endothelium is squamous epithelium. So there are three types of blood vessels. There are arteries, capillaries, and veins. Arteries will carry blood away from your heart. Capillaries are small and they exchange substances, usually oxygen, with body cells. And veins carry blood to the heart. So let's take a look at this picture, and let's pretend that there's a heart up here. And let's pretend that these two vessels right here, this artery and this vein, connect to that heart. So your heart's going to be pumping, and when it pumps blood out towards the rest of the body, and it'll go to an artery. And those arteries will eventually branch off into capillaries where gas exchange occurs with other cells. And then there will be veins right here, and the blood flow from the capillaries will go into the veins, and veins send blood to the heart. So now let's talk about arteries. There are three types: elastic, muscular, and there are arterioles. So elastic arteries are the largest, and they have something called elastic connective tissue, which we did not talk about in chapter 4. But they're basically a type of dense or connective tissue proper, which is characterized by a lot of elastin. And then there is muscular arteries, which are also called conducting and distributing arteries. They branch off from elastic arteries, and their tunica media allows them to vasoconstrict or vasodilate. Most arteries are muscular. And then there are your arterioles, which are the smallest, and they branch off from muscular arteries. Most have three layers, but some don't. So your elastic artery is the biggest one, and as you can see, its layers are really, really thick. And then after that, let's say this artery in this picture branched off. That branch would be a muscular artery. And as you can see, its tunica media is really, really thick. It's the biggest layer out of all the three layers in the muscular artery. And that allows it to vasoconstrict and vasodilate. And then let's say that this muscular artery branched off in this picture, and that branch off of the muscular artery would be an arteriole. As you can see, this arteriole has two layers, but most have three. So now let's talk about veins and capillaries. There are three types. Now I'm going to talk about them from smallest to largest instead of largest to smallest. So the first one is a postcapillary venule, and they emerge from capillaries. So capillaries merge together, and once gas exchange has occurred in those capillaries, when they merge together, those are postcapillary venules, and they're still porous, but they do have a tunica media, so that blood won't flow out. And then there are venules as well. They emerge from postcapillary venules. So when your postcapillary venules merge together, they'll make a venule, and they're a little bit porous, but they're not as porous as postcapillary venules, and they have all three layers as well, I believe. And then there are your veins. They have all three layers, and the tunica media is less developed compared to the arteries, but they use valves. So what I'm trying to say is, so in your vein, you see that their tunica media isn't really as developed, so they can't really pump blood back to the heart, but they do have valves in them. This picture doesn't show it, but they do have valves. This picture also doesn't show postcapillary veins, but just pretend that just imagine a smaller venule, basically. And so what I was saying earlier, so postcapillary veins will join together, and they'll join together at a venule, and then venules will join together at a vein. Now moving on. Capillaries. There are 5 types. Really, there are 2. These three at the bottom are actually divisions of this type of capillary, true capillaries. But I'm just gonna go with 5 types of capillaries anyway. So there are meta-arterioles, which are also called precapillaries. They're not really true capillaries because they have a tunica media. And then there are true capillaries, which branch off of meta-arterioles. And the 3 types of true capillaries are continuous, fenestrated, and sinusoidal. And we'll talk about them in the picture below. So here is a capillary bed. And as you can see, here's a meta-arteriole, and your capillaries will branch off of that meta-arteriole. And in their thoroughfare channel is what it's called, which is basically the anastomosis of with the true capillaries. There are precapillary sphincters, which allow blood to flow through true capillaries. Now, the types of true capillaries are continuous, fenestrated, and sinusoid. So your continuous isn't really as porous, and that's why it's called continuous. So it's continuous throughout. And then there are fenestrated, which have a bunch of pores in them. And you'll find these in areas like the kidneys, and they have pores in them because they're in places where rapid diffusion is needed. And then there's your sinusoid capillaries, which, as you can see, have really big pores, and they allow cells to go through them. And you'll find these in areas where hematopoiesis has taken place, like your bone marrow and your spleen and liver. So now let's talk about blood pressure. First, we have to talk about pressure. Pressure is basically the force per unit area. So blood pressure is the amount of force per unit area your blood pushes against your arteries. So blood pressure is measured in something called millimeters of mercury. Now, this isn't an SI unit, and if you don't know what SI units are, they're basically it's System International of Units. So they're basically the units that almost every country besides the US, because we're weird, but every country uses these units. Almost every country. And the blood pressure is actually measured from the arteries because the pressure in the capillaries and the veins is actually a lot lower compared to the arteries. And there are 2 types of blood pressure, systolic and diastolic. And if you remember from the last video, systolic means pertaining to contraction, and diastolic means pertaining to relaxation. It's measured in, I can never pronounce this, sphygmomanometer. Okay, my mom just yelled me sphygmomanometer. Anyway, so it's measured in a sphygmomanometer. I'm just going to call it a blood vessel or blood pressure meter. And it's measured as systolic over diastolic. And you want your blood pressure to stay in a range of 90 to 120 in your systolic and 60 to 80 in your diastolic. And your blood pressure lessens as it goes through the circulatory system, because just like air, blood goes through something called a pressure gradient. It goes from areas to highest pressure to lowest pressure. And as it goes to lower pressure, what happens is the pressure itself of the blood gets lower as well. So by the time it's in the veins, blood pressure is very low, so it can't really pump itself up. So your veins have valves, and your skeletal muscle squeezes your veins a little bit so that the blood will go up. And there's also a lung pump, I guess, so to speak, for blood pressure as well. So what happens is when your lungs inhale, the pressure in your thorax decreases and the pressure in your abdomen increases. And so that allows blood to go upward because blood goes from highest pressure to lowest pressure. So here's a little graph, and it shows pressure depending on the area or the location of your blood. So in your arteries and your aorta, your blood pressure is really high, but as it goes through arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, and it gets lower. And that's what I was trying to say earlier about the pressure gradient. Anyway, let's go to controlling blood pressure. So controlling blood pressure involves your cardiovascular center in your brain, your kidneys, and other various substances and chemicals that I don't want to get to, that I will probably not get to into this video. But the cardiovascular center is in the medulla oblongata. And if you don't know what that is, I mentioned that in the nervous system unit, so you can go there. And it regulates pressure through vasodilating or vasoconstricting your blood vessels. It can change your heart rate through the autonomic nervous system, or it can give muscle tone to your tunica media. And if you don't know what muscle tone is, you have to go back to the muscular system. Anyway, higher regions in your brain, so the cerebral cortex and the limbic system, which I talk about in the nervous system unit as well, tell your cardiovascular system if conditions need blood pressure to change. So let's say you are in need of a fight or flight response. Then what's going to happen is if you need you're going to need a blood pressure change in some areas, and your cardiovascular system or the higher regions of your brain will tell your cardiovascular system, hey, we need a blood pressure change. And anyway, there's also another thing to control blood pressure is something that your kidneys do, and it's called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So your kidneys will secrete a substance called renin, and that will allow something in your blood. That will allow a substance called angiotensinogen in your blood to change into angiotensin 1. And then enzymes from your lungs will change angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 allows your blood vessels to contract or vasoconstrict. And then after that, angiotensin 2 also stimulates your brain to tell your kidneys to release aldosterone. And aldosterone allows your kidneys to keep in water and sodium ions. And because of this, it increases your blood volume, hence increasing blood pressure. Now, here's a little timeline of what we learned in the video. So first, we talked about the structure of blood vessels. Then we talked about what the types of arteries, veins, and capillaries. After that, we talked about blood pressure and how your body controls it. And finally, I just want to say thank you for watching. And I'll see you real soon.